accusations of corporate welfare being handed out by the state of Tennessee, and races in Arizona that could tip the balance of power in Congress. And America's talking. Welcome to The States, powered by the Center Square. It's Friday, July 17th, 2026. I'm your host, Johnny Edwards, filling in for Greg Bishop. Well, corporate welfare or just keeping up with the competition, whatever it is, Tennessee is handing out hundreds of millions of dollars in exchange for promises of jobs, handing this money out to private companies. The Center Square took a hard look at corporate accountability under this program, finding companies often fall short on their promises. And what happens when they do?
The real question that I think most people are interested in is, do you enforce the clawback provision? The answer is yes, we do.
Over the past 8 years alone, the state of Tennessee has awarded more than $760 million in grants to about 585 private companies. The state calls them grants. Government accountability groups call them corporate welfare. Now, this is enticement money to make relocations and expansions go through. In exchange, these companies promise to create jobs. A lot of states do the same thing, including Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia, and Texas. The issue has come to a head in Tennessee, though, this year because the state is giving a $30 million grant to Starbucks to open new Southeast corporate headquarters in Nashville. Critics have been questioning why a highly successful company like Starbucks should get taxpayer money to move to a bustling city like Nashville. We asked the state's recruiter-in-chief, Economic Development Commissioner Stuart McWhorter, why give this money to Starbucks?
When someone comes up to you and specifically mentions Starbucks, because that was the big question, even in the meeting, why are you giving this really big company that's making money? Why are you giving them $30 million to locate their regional office here? What do you say to the everyday person?
Sure. Well, first of all, it was highly competitive. We were one of 3 states that they were looking at, and we knew that. We were aware of the competitiveness of that. And so it wasn't as if they said, we're going to come to Tennessee no matter what can you give us to help us make life easier? It was not that. We had to compete. And we compete just like with Starbucks. We compete on every project that comes our way. Even if companies expand, they're already here and they're looking for an expansion. They look to other states because they have other locations too. So it's always competitive.
Starbucks, by the way, has been shifting out of Washington state for various reasons. Not only did Seattle's Democratic Socialist mayor once call for a boycott of the company, but state lawmakers approved the millionaire's tax. The company hasn't directly linked that tax to its move to Nashville. Here's where things get more interesting. McWhorter says it's rare for the state to have to claw back money from companies that don't fulfill their contracts, that don't create the number of jobs they've promised. But the Center Square obtained the department's own internal spreadsheet tracking clawbacks through a public records request. It shows clawbacks have happened 71 times since 2016. Through that process, the state has collected $92.4 million back from 55 companies and is still fighting for more. The state is still owed $20.1 million from 18 companies. That includes $8.8 million still owed from judgments obtained in court and $6.1 million owed by 5 companies that's tied up in litigation. In one of the most stark failures of this program, the state gave $3 million in 2017 to a company called Textile Corporation of America, which promised 1,000 jobs in Pikeville. The company created 0 jobs, and its owners, who were twin brothers, went to prison on wire fraud and conspiracy charges. So far, the state has gotten back about $1 million of that $3 million grant. McWhorter told us the state tries to prevent things like this from happening.
It's really important on the front end. When we initiate these grants, we do all the due diligence on the front end. We want to make sure the company has proof of funds, that they are in good standing, so that if this happens and there's a clawback, we have assurance that we are going to get paid back. And those conversations are had up front. There's a clear understanding of what these accountability agreements are and what they mean. And so if and when that time comes, and again, it's rare, but if and when that time comes and there's a clawback, there should be no surprises.
Now, it's government accountability groups like the Beacon Center of Tennessee and the Tennessee chapter of Americans for Prosperity who are speaking out against these grants, but many Republicans still support it.
The reason why we do incentives is we as a state need are strictly prohibited to very few income generating modes or methods. Those generally are F&E, corporate taxes, and then sales tax. So those are the two big ones, and then fuel tax, of course. But whenever we add a job, we're adding a sales taxpayer. So when you look at it from an incentives basis, yes, we're distributing well fought for dollars from its citizens into these businesses, but the goal here is to look at, okay, how, for based upon this investment the state has, what do we think our return on that investment is going to be through those utilization taxes that we have? Because we have no income tax. And so we need payers in seats in order to continue to provide services through the state. And so this is a way in which we could do it.
Meanwhile, fast track has become a hot topic on the campaign trail in the current race for Tennessee governor. Two Republican candidates have called this corporate welfare. That's State Representative Monty Fritz and Congressman John Rose. Rose also attacked Starbucks' West Coast values. Another Republican candidate, U.S. Senator Marsha Blackburn, expressed support for fast track. She says the state will get that $30 million back in payroll taxes in about 6 months. Again, this is The States, powered by the Center Square. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's turn now to Congress and Center Square reporter Andrew Rice. Andrew is covering multiple congressional races in the swing state of Arizona, races that could tip the delicate balance of power between the two parties in Congress. He's looking at Arizona's 1st, 2nd, and 3rd congressional districts. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, Johnny. Great to be here.
Great to have you here. So what's at stake here? What's the split in Congress right now? And walk us through how these races could affect that.
Right. Well, we have a very delicate balance of power right now in Congress. It's been a very close split between Republicans and Democrats, with right now Republicans only having that 219 person majority. Now, you have to have 218 members to pass any piece of significant legislation. So looking ahead to the midterm elections, these races are going to become ever more important. And as you mentioned, Johnny, Arizona is a swing state. So we're looking at these congressional races across the state that could really go in either direction. Particularly, we're looking at, some races in, as you mentioned, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd congressional districts, but we're also looking at an interesting race in District 5 in Arizona's 5th congressional district, as well as Arizona's 6th congressional district. We have, incumbent members of incumbent Republicans trying to fight off challenges from members of their own party and other Democrats. So what we're looking at right here is specifically, if we look at the 1st congressional district, we're looking at one of the closest congressional districts in the country. So Arizona's 1st district just last year won, last election cycle in 2024, Representative David Schweikert, he only won his race by 51.9% of the vote over Democrat Amish Shah. Schweikert is now not running for re-election, instead opting to run for the governor's race, bringing a slew of other candidates, including Shah, back into this race. So we're looking at a lot of really interesting competition here.
Now, I understand the candidates include a former broadcast journalist, a former NFL analyst, a former president of the Navajo Nation. Who are some of the more colorful characters running for Congress in Arizona right now?
Right, certainly. Well, if we look at, again, that District 1, that race, David Schweikert is is running for governor, and so in his place, the Republicans seeking to fill his place include a former NFL analyst, Jay Feely. Jay Feely has actually made made some interesting ground moving forward in this congressional race. He's earned the endorsement from President Donald Trump, and he's called for supporting the administration's actions seeking to lower costs for Americans. So Feely is one of those big contenders, but he's not the only one. He's looking to face off also against a technology consultant, John Trobo, and Arizona Representative Joseph Chaplik. And that's just for on the Republican side to take over Schweikert's position. If we look at some other districts in Arizona, in Congressional District 5 is also another tense competition for representatives seeking to take over a spot left open by Andy Biggs. Andy Biggs decided not to run for re-election in the 5th Congressional District to seek the nomination for governor, challenging Democrat Katie Hobbs. And we have former Sheriff Mark Lamb competing against Daniel Keenan, a business owner. And this one's really interesting, Johnny, because Lamb has received a slew of endorsements, including from President Donald Trump, House Speaker Mike Johnson, Congressman Eli Crane, and Paul Gosar, critical congressman in Arizona. But he's fallen behind in some of the fundraising compared to Keenan. Keenan has led those fundraising efforts with more than $1.8 million in contributions, followed by Lamb with just slightly more than $759,000. So lots of interesting characters here, and it'll make for some really interesting races, not just on Tuesday for Arizona's primary, but certainly in the November general election as well.
So let's break this down and simplify this for our viewers and listeners. I mean, how many seats are we talking about that are up for election, and which party holds those seats now?
Right. So in Arizona, we're talking about across Arizona, we're talking about 9 congressional seats. There's only 9 in Arizona, and some of those are a little bit more solidified than others. Particularly the ones that we're really looking at is, like I said, that 1st congressional seat. So we're really looking at 2 big ones that could honestly go either way. 2 big congressional races that are likely to go either way. But but there's also about 3 more that are coming into a little bit more competition in Arizona. So right now we're really looking at, of those 9, we have a special focus on 2 that most political analysts are saying are toss-up races, which means either party could could take over those seats. But then we also have 3 more congressional districts that we're keeping a special eye on, as well as just a general eye on all 9 to see how Arizona voters are going to vote and how these majorities are going to shift. Like I said, we have a very delicate balance in Congress right now. Republicans barely have a lead over Democrats. And we've seen historically in the past, when a candidate for president from one party comes in, typically the following election cycle, that midterm cycle, the opposing party kind of has a sweep in Congress. And so we've seen, with rising unpopularity of President Donald Trump and the Trump administration, we've seen a lot of that political games come into play. And Johnny, it's really important to remember that in Arizona, Arizona is a border state. It's on the border with Mexico and the United States. And so we've seen lots of different opinions come out about how the Trump administration has pursued immigration and has worked to secure the border. There's been a historic low in border crossings, but we've also seen a lot of upheaval and upset in how the deportations process goes, and that's certainly a factor for many of these candidates, Republican and Democrat alike, seeking these seats.
Now, are these seats mostly held by Democrats or Republicans right now?
Right. So yeah, when we're looking across the board, we see most of these seats are still held by Republicans. While there are narrow majorities, most of these seats are and narrow wins. Most of them are held by Republicans. We haven't seen anything in Arizona like in other states across the country to have a massive redistricting effort, but but we still do see that, most of them are held by Republicans. So when you're looking at that, it's a 6-3 kind of Republican advantage here. So there are 6 Republican of those. Like I said, there's 9 congressional seats that we're looking at. There's 6 Republicans in charge of different congressional districts versus 3 Democrats that are more around those major metro areas where those Democrats are in control.
Well, that explains why this is so important. So if Democrats were to take those seats, it would be a huge win. And as you mentioned, that happens almost with every president every time. It certainly happened in Trump's first term. So let's just cut to the chase here. Who's favored to win, or is that even known yet?
Right. It's hard to see who's favored to win in some of these. Honestly, there's the idea that the incumbent comes in with a lot of extra weight and a lot of extra power into some of these races. But I mean, I'll tell you, Johnny, in some of these races, we don't have incumbents running. I mentioned in District 1 and District 5, Representatives David Schweiker in District 1 and Andy Biggs in District 5. They're not running, so that pull is a lot more difficult. Looking at some of these polls, we've definitely seen the Trump endorsement have a big swing factor for some of these Republicans, particularly Jay Feely, that NFL analyst. He's up in some polls in that first district over some of his other Republican counterparts. But we also have those other Democrats that are in that first district that are still, they're vying for those positions. And like I mentioned, Amish Shah, who has previously run in the district, he is up in some polls, but down in some fundraising in that first district. So it is going to be really interesting to see what some of these races look like moving forward and how those polls kind of shake out. Overall, though, Johnny, we still are seeing a Republican advantage in some of these. When we poll people out of, once it comes down to the general election, who are you more likely to vote for? We are seeing a bigger Republican advantage, but Democrats could swing in and have a greater sway come down the line.
Well, now you mentioned some major issues like immigration and border control and things like that, but are there any issues on the ground that matter to Arizonans mainly that could affect these races?
Right. Well, like I said, that immigration is definitely a big thing here. And that honestly does feel like a local issue for many of these Arizonans because they are on that border state. But there is also a big issue about data centers. When I talked to candidates across the different districts, there were various opposing views. Some Democrat candidates I spoke to on the more progressive side said there should be a minimum 1-year moratorium on data centers in their congressional districts. Whereas on the other side, Republicans were a little more hesitant to say an outright moratorium was needed, and even some more moderate Democrat candidates would have said the same. But there are quite a few opposing views. A big thing in Arizona is resource and water scarcity, and these data centers get at the heart of that because of the amount of water that they use. So that's also a big issue that's kind of come about, and lots of various proposals for that with these congressional candidates.
I imagine the Democrats are taking big swings at the Trump administration as well. Is that another way they're trying to gain traction at the polls?
Yes, certainly. It almost seems, as I've talked to different candidates in Democrat candidates particularly, a big litmus test for them, if you will, is the support or really criticism of President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill. A lot of candidates have pushed back against the policies that were brought in through that, the funding for Border Patrol and ICE, as well as the cuts to Medicare and Medicaid. A lot of Democrats are really pushing against the Trump administration's policies in that realm, and it has been certainly a very interesting way to see how far people are willing to go. Some candidates on that more progressive end that I've spoken to are calling for an abolition of ICE, completely abolishing ICE. Others are showing signs that, it needs serious reforms, but we can't just get rid of it altogether, and that really gets to the heart of what it is like to be a candidate in one of these border states.
What about the war in Iran? Are you seeing that come up at all on the campaign trail?
Oh, certainly, yes. As well, with the flux of negotiations going back and forth with the war in Iran, there is definitely some concern over rising gas prices, rising oil prices, and just the fact that it feels like America and what candidates have told me that the United States has gone into another endless war. Negotiations are still changing, and as I've talked to these candidates, things have shifted rapidly. We were once, in what seemed like a peace, something that was going to lead to a peace deal, and understanding that was going to lead to a peace deal, and now we're back to increased hostilities and strikes day after day. So this is a rapidly evolving situation, and really, what I'm seeing from what candidates are saying is we need a stronger policy to stabilize these global energy markets, and we need to get out of this war that is causing these energy markets to just go wild.
So I imagine that's also something giving more fuel to the Democrat side than the Republican side.
Certainly. Democrats are taking that as much as they can to push in and get gains in Arizona.
Talk to us a little bit about fundraising. Who's winning in the fundraising race?
Right. Well, when we look at the fundraising, the fundraising shows some really interesting trends. Even with endorsements, that doesn't always guarantee a certainty for some fundraising, particularly if we look at that 5th district where 2 Republicans are seeking to take over from Representative Andy Biggs. That's business owner Daniel Keenan and former Sheriff Mark Lamb. Lamb has the endorsement of President Trump. He has the endorsement of key figures in Arizona politics, but he's falling behind significantly in fundraising. Keenan has led some fundraising efforts with more than $1.8 million in contributions that he's earned. But Lamb has significantly less than that, with less than $800,000 in his account. And that fundraising for some of these races, that can make the biggest difference over some of these endorsements. So it'll be interesting to see how an endorsement heavy candidate challenges funds heavy candidate. It'll be really interesting to see how that goes. But we look at some other districts where specifically District 6, where Juan Ciscomani, he's a Republican running in a district that shares a lot of border with the U.S.-Mexico border, shares a lot of portions with that. He's actually falling behind compared to his Democrat competitor, Joanna Mendoza. Mendoza has more than $6.4 million in contributions to her 2026 campaign, whereas Ciscomani has about 3.9 million. That's a massive difference, especially compared to especially for a Republican candidate who is an incumbent that has the support of President Trump versus a Democrat who has not had that as much support, but has slowly been getting more endorsements from key Democrats in the state of Arizona. So it's really interesting to see how some of these fundraising issues come into play and what it'll take to win some of these races, whether it's endorsements or whether it's those funds.
Now, another litmus test I often take a look at. I know you've reached out to all the candidates. Who's engaging with you and who's not?
Really, it's candidates down the ballot, Johnny, that are engaging with me. It's these candidates that might not be at the top of their ballot, might not be at the top of their fundraising, but I've heard from Rick McCartney in District 1. I've heard from Brian Holiday in District 5, and these are candidates who, they're a little bit more down the ballot and maybe not have as much funds with them, but those are the ones reaching out to me.
Right. Well, Andrew Rice, nice work, and I know you'll keep us posted on election outcomes. We appreciate you taking time today. You can follow Andrew's stories and other state-by-state reporting by the Center Square at thecentersquare.com. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Now let's take a look at quick hits from America's Talking with headlines from across the country. You can find these stories linked in the description down below or in your inbox with the Center Square newsletter, free at thecentersquare.com. Starting off in the Midwest, a story many of us are smelling. Canadian wildfires are fueling hazardous air conditions across the U.S., with the Great Lakes states experiencing some of the most hazardous conditions. Nearly 20 states have air quality alerts as smoke from more than 180 wildfires in Canada and nearly a dozen in Minnesota drifts as far east as New York City and Washington. Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota are expected to bear the brunt of smoke today before it moves east. The current air quality index is at hazardous levels throughout much of the Great Lakes region. Down to Florida, the U.S. Navy awarded an $88 million contract to Florida State University to develop technology for next-generation ship power systems, expanding a research partnership aimed at improving the efficiency of warships. The 5-year contract will fund research, modeling, simulation, and testing of advanced shipboard power systems at FSU's Center for Advanced Power Systems. The total value of the contract could reach $99.5 million. West to Texas. State government agencies are being ordered to make cuts. 3 of the state's most powerful elected officials are telling state agencies and universities to cut spending by 3%. The joint policy directive came from Governor Greg Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, and Speaker Dustin Burrows. The directive is part of their guidance for agencies before they make their funding requests in the upcoming budget process. The Texas budget is passed by the legislature every 2 years. The directive requires agencies to, quote, demonstrate prudent stewardship of taxpayer resources. It comes as the governor is touring the state promoting an affordability tour to find ways to reduce costs for Texans. Last up, staying in the South with North Carolina. In upcoming congressional races, the Center Square took a deep look at fundraising, specifically several candidates' cash-on-hand advantages. That is the actual amount of liquid funds each candidate has to spend. In a pivotal U.S. Senate race, Democrat Roy Cooper of Raleigh has $20.7 million cash on hand and total receipts of $34.9 million since January 1st, 2025. According to filings with the Federal Elections Commission, Republican Michael Whatley of Gastonia has $2.5 million on hand and total receipts of $8.4 million. Compare those to others on that ballot. Libertarian Shannon Bray does not have a report filed with the Federal Elections Commission. The Green Party's Michael Dublin of Gardner has $10,000 cash on hand and total receipts of $25,000. For a full rundown of cash on hand and other North Carolina races, check out the story at thecentersquare.com. That is your quick clips from across the country here with the states powered by the Center Square. Get those and other headlines at thecentersquare.com. From Atlanta, Georgia, I'm Johnny Edwards. Join us again on Monday to start the week off with more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from around the nation, only at the States. Thanks for joining us. Have a wonderful weekend.